Welcome to Altar of the Demo Gods. If you're wondering what advice from two experienced sales engineers sounds like, it's a little like this.
Welcome back to Altar the Demo Gods. I'm Keith Wilson, joined by my co-host John Morton. John, how you doing tonight?
Good to see you, Keith. Been a long time.
No ahoy hoy?
No, I'm gonna change it up. I'm gonna sprinkle it in. I'm gonna take it away and sprinkle it in.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's like a drug dealer. You can't just dole that out for free and then expect when I come back that you're gonna withhold on me like that.
The peaches ain't free, they're extra. Yeah, man.
John, we talked about travel a little bit in our last episode, doing some travel. I think you even mentioned not necessarily travel-wise, but you do have a call that's on the other side of the world coming up here in a little bit. Is that I'm not going to pry too much, but is that a sales call? Is that a support call? Is it internal? What do you have going on?
Internal engineering calls, yeah. So I try to keep in touch.
Do you prefer the internal meetings discussions with colleagues or meetings with customers?
Oh man, now that's a good one. So
be honest. You're not gonna. Yeah. We understand you love your customers.
Being honest, yeah, man. I love sales. If I get in front of people, and again, there's a difference. I like in-person customer meetings. My absolute favorite thing of all time, definitively. Number one. Number two is, remote customer meetings where they're actually a customer, not a prospect. I'm not trying to pitch them yet. Number three would be internal meetings, and they vary all over the map. Because if you're having a randomly scheduled internal HR meeting, it's probably not a good meeting. Right. And then last but not least is, calling into a customer who just doesn't want to talk to you, right, or a prospect. So that's the order.
Yeah, I will say, I feel like there's a lot of caveats for those internal meetings too, right? There's so much that, you mentioned HR being one of them, but there's also just regular meetings where you have to go, like you're obliged to go, you have to be there, and they're pointless, right? The time draining meetings and stuff like that. But yeah, I think the customer facing meetings have always been my favorite.
I saw the dopest
interface with customers, getting to see them.
I saw the dopest meme I want to print out on this. I noticed on the camera, I got this little space on my corkboard here. It used to be my wife's desk. She doesn't work in there anymore. But it said, this meeting could have been a fist fight. I love that.
I want that on a t-shirt. This meeting could have been a fist fight.
I would have been more amped to go to it. I'll tell you that much. I'm bringing 20s and taking bets, man.
Well, it's going to be,
to your point,
more time. It's going to be time efficient. Yeah. Yeah. So before we go off on a tangent there, I love that. Before we go off on a tangent there, let's talk about what we were talking about last episode. And that was solutions design. For me, some of the more important points that we went over were when we were trying to understand customer needs, were having doing the gap analysis, understanding where they are, where they want to be, and then you help them design the solution to get from point A to point B. Also, that you're going to bring in a lot of people to help you, especially if it's a large solution. You'll need to collaborate with those folks, and in order to make sure you're not wasting everybody's time, you want to make sure that you and the customer are on the same level, that you're communicating properly, you're setting the same expectations, you're repeating in your words what you think their problems are that you're trying to solve, and you're getting the sign off, the buy off on that with the customer. John, what were your thoughts on last week's episode?
Yeah, very important, right? So I think anybody who's in technical sales to some degree most likely enjoys solution designing. Maybe not the mundane tasks, but getting into someone's environment, looking through their environment and helping them solve a problem is probably why a lot of folks stay in technical sales. I'll admit that's what I like to do, right? I like to help solve a problem by looking at where you're at and where you want to be. And it could be a good process for both you and the customer once you get it right.
Sure. So In this episode, we're going to be talking about a topic that's near and dear to John's heart, and that is RFX responses. And the X in that doesn't actually stand for anything that starts with an X. It's a placeholder for I, P, or Q. Those are kind of the only ones that I've ever seen. So, John, I'm going to let you pick for the acronym of the week this week. Is it going to be RFI, RFP, or RFQ?
I'm going to go with my least favorite, biggest time waster, and my own nightmare, RFI.
RFI. So RFI. That's a little bit louder than normal. Normally it's more subdued.
Hey, RFI deserves that response.
Yeah. So RFI stands for request for information.
Correct.
And it's usually it's the least serious out of the three. So that's why John says it's the biggest time waster. Just as a side note, RFP stands for request for proposal, and RFQ, I believe, stands for request for quote. But I could be wrong on that one. But we're gonna talk about RFI here a little bit, and so RFI, request for information. Generally, it's a list of, if you're lucky, dozens of questions. If you're unlucky, hundreds of questions. I'm not joking. I filled out RFIs.
I'm dying right now.
Hundreds of questions, and John's laughing because he knows I'm not joking. He's filled out RFIs like that before too.
You're talking like an Excel spreadsheet with 8 tabs in 400 line items each.
Yeah, and they're going to be questions in the start of the RFI are going to be general questions about your company, right? What information can you give us to tell us that you're a solid company, you're not going to go out of business, that you don't screw your customers, that sort of thing, right? Our due diligence type questions. And then the next questions are set of questions are going to be generally should be about around what my problem is without telling you what my problem is and asking you questions about how you can solve that problem, right? The problem, and I'm going to guess this is why John has a problem with them, because it's why I have a problem with them, is it's a very different process from what we discussed in last week's, where you're having a conversation, a two-way conversation with somebody about what their problem is. Because in RFIs, they've already made up with their mind what they think the problem is. And remember, we talked about how sometimes customers will think there's a problem, but it's really a symptom of a problem. But they've already defined what it is, and they're not sharing it with anybody. So you can't clarify that understanding. You can simply respond to those questions. And it's they try and make it appear that it's a two-way thing and that it's this whole thing, but it's not. It's a one-way conversation. And the reality is it's a one-way conversation because another vendor already wrote that. Wrote that, he or she wrote those questions.
Yeah. So to add insult to injury too, and taking it one step back, even if you are pretty savvy and you get this RFI in your inbox and, your somebody wants to put it in the sales forecast as a committed deal. That was a terrible joke, but you get it if you've been there. And you want to reach out. It's normally distributed and managed by a project manager who doesn't have any particular input or control over the RFI. Their job was literally go distribute this RFI to a handful of vendors we think can answer it, and then answer their questions. So even if you had amplifying, very important questions to be answered, it goes to a project manager who says, hey Keith, I got 2 weeks to fill this out. What do you want? I work an hourly wage. Leave me alone. So to Keith's point, that's number one. It's normally managed by a project manager, and it's data one way. The other thing is you would wish and pray it was simple questions like yes or no. Sometimes they're like explain in detail and attach documentation. The other piece is I wouldn't be so upset if it could only be handled by the technical sales team. But to Keith's point, there's some things you shouldn't be answering. Like, what are your RPOs or RTOs? So what are legally binding obligations you're going to have as service level agreements that you're going to commit into this document? So you have to include like other people from your organization to help fill out this nightmare of a document. My head's about to explode.
So as much as we're about these things, God, now I gotta bleep that out. I forgot we're a family-friendly show. As much as we're complaining about those things, we still have to fill them out on occasion. There's a reason why. There's a lot of large companies for compliance have to do it, or just as part of their vendor management process have to do it, especially if it's over a certain dollar value. And they're a publicly traded company or whatever, right? There's tons of different reasons why they do it. But if you deal with any sort of government entity, you're almost certainly doing it this way. Because they have to be very transparent in how they selected people to avoid, so that they can at least give the appearance of not being corrupt and things like that, right? They can give the appearance of non-impropriety by going, well, we asked everybody the exact same questions. They all have the chance to submit their questions. Like it's a very fair process, at least on the surface. I mean, there's so much back channeling and things that happen with these aside from just the documents themselves that makes the whole thing kind of shady. But it's a necessary evil. So I think that that's one of the main reasons why it's worth us having this conversation on here, right? So worst case scenario now, we have to fill out these things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So I don't mean to be so cruel to these things because they actually have a tiny bit of value, and I'll highlight that. So the only two ways they provide me value for a company is anybody getting new into technical sales. Your job is most likely going to be filling out RFIs. I don't want to do it. Keith doesn't want to do it. Welcome to your initiation here of countless hours in RFIs. So when you look at it from that perspective, if you're new to an organization or you're new to selling some sort of solution and you're in a technical capacity, RFIs are actually beneficial to your learning process. Yeah. You are going to look at these questions and go look up the answers internally. That has some inherent value in educating somebody new or even, been there a while, but about what we do as a product, right? Or as a technical solution. The other aspect is going through RFIs, I get a good understanding about either competitive intel or the landscape we happen to be in. Why are they asking these questions? Are there patterns to what's being asked for, right? Success criteria. Are there things that are recurring themes or are there new things that are popping up? So there's also some sort of competitive analysis that can be done about either the market, the field, or whatever you're selling. So there is valuable data there, but trust me, it's a slog, right?
Yeah. So generally, if you have at least a somewhat mature organization of sales engineers, there's going to be some sort of repository of these answers, question and answer pairs somewhere. If you're lucky, it's some sort of searchable, some sort of searchable web-based tool that you can use to find these question and answer pairs that match certain keywords for the response that you're trying to fill in, right? If your organization hasn't reached that level of maturity, or you go to work for an organization that hasn't reached that level of maturity, now's the time to start doing that. Start a spreadsheet. Just start a spread. Be the one that does that. It doesn't have to be complicated, but start a spreadsheet of question and answer pairs so that you're saving work of the same, because a lot of these RFIs are the same. The reason being, at least in our industry, is VARs will recycle RFIs, right? Mm-hmm. So the partners of the customers, the value-added resellers for the customers, they'll take the same RFI and just reuse it over and over again with different customers. So you see a lot of the same questions pop up. But even then, even if they're not being reused, they're going to ask generally the same type of questions. So start recording those.
That's important. Even when you do job interviews, if you always ask, do you have an RFI, RFP repo? Where just save them, man. If you do go to the effort of filling them out and collecting them, save them anywhere. To Keith's point, it'd be nice if you did the work to put them in a spreadsheet and organize them. But just save them. They're going to come in handy.
Yeah, even if you just have a folder full of the Word docs that you guys have filled in for these, even that's enough, right? Because there's easy ways to search and index that stuff now. Hell, you could now just take all that stuff. I guarantee, I'm not going to get too nerdy technical on this, but you could take that. I've been doing a lot of AI research. You could take that, put all of those in a vector store, and almost create your own AI chatbot. Right? AI is going to revolutionize this, by the way. That's what we should be talking about, because it's going to get AI. If you're a sales engineer and not using AI to fill in RFIs, I'm not saying do it immediately, because there's a caveat. You don't want to just use straight up Chat GPT. That'd be stupid. Don't do that. But look into using technologies. I'm going to go on a little bit of a technical rant here. Look into using technologies like LangChain, where you can add in and kind of customize your own bits and create your own chatbot using the Chat GPT API, right? So you don't need to go build your own LLM or anything like that. Large language model for those that aren't into AI, but you can create your own vector store, your own knowledge base of information, and then have this chatbot that you can use to query that data store and provide you with responses. Hell, this may be a tool I may start developing now that we talk about it more.
As a side note, right? When we talk about selling, what Keith did is he said, John Morton has this pain he harps on about all the time, and I got a solution. If Keith would have just followed this up and he said, hey, John, I got a new product. You want to buy it? I might be interested.
Yeah. I mean, I could sell you on the vision, right? That wouldn't be too hard. It's imagine a world where RFX, any sort of RFX response can be done in 15 minutes or less with X percentage of accuracy, right?
Love it.
Now you're going to go, well, I need it to be 100%, but even humans aren't going to be 100% accurate.
80%,
right?
And I'm good.
Yeah. Right. It's enough to weed out the bad stuff and still do responses.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I'm sure there's people out there already doing this. That's why, I'm not too concerned about tossing this idea out into the ether. And you know what? If somebody else picks it up and runs with it, congratulations. Like if I am just tossing this out and brand new and somebody picks this up and runs with it, let's, you don't owe me anything, but let's talk, because I would like to add input to this tool. Right.
Yeah. Let me provide some feedback.
If I don't build it myself, but I have a feeling that there's some companies that already do RFX repositories that are going, it's a very logical step. Okay. Let's now connect this repository to, Chat GPT with an API key, and now you have a searchable thing. It's almost too easy thing to do if you already have a company that does RFX repos.
Exactly.
Okay. With that being said, we took a slight diversion there, but I think that's where this stuff is really headed next, right? John, you do bring up a good point. Almost every time I started at a company as the new SE, there was always some sort of RFX response that needed to be responded to. And I ended up getting it to respond. And it's almost treated like a new guy scavenger hunt, right? Because you get to learn all the departments. You learn one of John's favorite sayings, who's who in the zoo for your own company. And you learn who to work with in that, but you also do, you kind of learn the ins and outs of your product a little bit, and kind of get to scratch the surface on there. Now, when you're responding to these things, you are going to do cut and paste responses. However, you don't want to just leave it at cut and paste, from the repo into this. And this is where I think AI will be super helpful, because if you add in context now of, well, this is a customer that is in this vertical asking the question this way in this context, how can we make this relate back to the customer? Take AI out of the equation. That's going back to trying to understand the problem. And where you got to get really good at is trying to decipher what the problem actually is from this one-way conversation that you're having. going back to my problem with RFIs,
Absolutely
right?
agree.
So you really need to make sure that you understand the problem in order to customize your responses appropriately, because you always want to be targeting that problem. Almost makes me think back to, like, I've done a little, very, very small bit of like media training, how to talk to the media. Very, like, don't put me on a cable news program tomorrow or anything, because I'll freeze. But generally, what you want to do, and it kind of applies to this, and you watch any sort of interview, because they do it there too. You want to have your talking points. Generally, those are going to be about 3 talking points, maybe 1 to 3 talking points. You're going to have many, and you're always going to tie back whatever the question is. You're tying back to that talking point, right?
Right.
You're going to go answer the question and then find a way to bring it back to that talking point. You're doing the same thing in this, right? And then you're tying it back to the problem. You're tying it back to the business value and your customization of the message. Obviously, there's some things that can't really be customized. They're what is the name of your business? Well, that's going to be the same no matter what, right? Our legal name is what's your
business founded?
Yeah, that's not gonna change, right? What's your DNB number? That's not gonna change. All of that stuff is gonna stay the same. Now, when I used to work for IBM, we had whole teams that would be like we would almost have a project manager on our side that would manage the response, and he or she would get input from everybody that was part of it. And, I would get my assigned questions, and then somebody on another team would get their assigned questions. Somebody in sales would get their assigned questions. Somebody in legal would get their assigned questions. In that case, you've got all these different people collaborating and working together on these gigantic responses.
Right.
But I worked for IBM that had the resources to do that. How do you collaborate with others on a large RFP response when you necessarily can't have somebody to manage that when you are that quarterback, right? I don't get to hand it off to some RFP manager from the vendor side to go, here, you manage this for me and make sure I get the responses I need. But I have to quarterback that.
Yeah. You know what's interesting too? That's a good point. So like at small startups, like what I'm used to, it's still collaborative. It's just not necessarily who you would expect. So sometimes, RFP has legal questions. I actually give that to the CFO, and most of the time they don't mind doing it. Not like, it's not like a CFO at Cisco where he has to do other stuff, or they might have time to do it. There's security questions about our infrastructure, how we pass SOC 2, whatever. I'll give it to the CISO. There's questions about product features and enhancements. I'll give it to like the head of engineering. So it's still sort of that collaborative method. It's just with not who you would expect. Sometimes at a smaller org, it's those C-level folks who are doing it. Because again, it's like a legal obligation. I'm not going to answer some of those questions where I have no choice but to ask the CFO, or if you have a legal office, the legal. And they're almost always willing to help you. That's like the cool thing about working at small startups, but it's still that collaborative effort.
Yeah, I was going to say at that point too, not only are you managing outward because you have to manage people that you have no authority over, but you're managing people that have authority over you. Right? And the best piece of advice I can give for that, just from the experience that I have of doing that a lot, because I have a lot of people that I manage that don't report to me, that I have no authority over whatsoever. So I manage outward a lot, right? Outside of my team a lot. It's been one of the skills that's been very difficult to develop. Patience. Be patient. Yeah. Things will move at the speed that they move, but people will respect you.
Yeah.
If you're patient but consistent, right? People don't mind that you follow up with them. As long as you're not putting pressure on them, you're doing your friendly check-ins, but you're also reminding them of why this needs to be done.
That's it, Keith.
And if you can tie it back to them personally, of this is a $1.5 million deal that it's going to close at this time. If we get the answers in by this date, otherwise it may not close, or it may be delayed. Like, you can start listing off implications, but being professional in your delivery. Again, not just sending an email every day going, you do this yet? Hey, did you do this yet? Hey, did you do this yet? Hey, why haven't you done this yet? Like, because that's not going to work. That just annoys people. right?
I always ask for about 30 minutes to organize a chat with whoever I think might be involved, even selling up people, to your point, that have authority or dominion over you. And I like to be clear and concise. Clear clear is kind and concise is effective. And I have a very explicit ask. I need you to fill out these bullet points to the best of your ability, and I need it done by this time. If you organize a meeting in that way, quick 30 minutes, to Keith's point, here's why we're doing it. $2 million deal, $200,000 deal. I need you, blah, 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 to do XYZ by this date. Man, you're already establishing yourself as a business professional. Yet again, we come back to this, Keith.
All right, John, it's the part that we love and hate at the same time, and that's when we come up to the end of the show. We love it because we're going to summarize what we talked about here and kind of give our final thoughts. But we hate it because it's the end of the show. So for me, and this whole RFX conversation is these are a necessary evil. We have to do RFIs, we have to do RFPs, we have to do RFQs. Maybe not all the time, but they're still going to come up. I think AI is the solution. I just don't know if there is an AI solution yet. Right? Because you want something that's accurate, that's not going to hallucinate and have all these other problems that AI has when it's representing your business. But I think there's a market there. As John said, there's a pain and it needs to be solved. And I think it can be. Without that, be the person that starts the repository, even if it's just a spreadsheet, even if it's just saving RFX responses in a folder. And I think I've said RFP several times without us going, with that being RFI.
RFP.
Several times. No, RFI. It was RFI, right? RFI. And now RFPs and RFQs really aren't requests for quotes. I'm not even going to talk about those just because I've never really dealt with them. Yeah, RFPs are very similar to RFIs. They're more formal. Sometimes they'll have more questions, but they're usually when you're further down the sales path, they'll include, sales dollars and quotes and more of the legal stuff that John talked about and terms and things like that. It's when you've gotten more of generally when they're getting closer to, making a decision. But RFPs are used for so many different things that I'm sure outside of tech, they're probably have a whole different application. Be clear and concise in your collaboration with your asks. Be patient and just do the work, right? If you're the new guy, it's going to be a good way to learn the product. Yep. If you're the old guy, it's going to be frustrating. But if you know that it's going to turn into a reward, then spend the time doing it. But there should be a debate. We didn't talk about this. So there should be a debate up front of the merits of whether or not you actually do reply to an RFI. Because there's plenty of times
my answer
where you
is
should
normally
reply.
Standing now, but we'll leave that for another day.
All right, John, why don't you go ahead and tell us what you've learned from this episode, or how do you want to summarize this episode?
Number one thing I had bouncing around my mind was I think RFX would have been a dope ass band name, like 90s electronica, like pre EDM, like RFX is what I think of. But no,
there's no FX. I don't know if you listen to them. I was a big RFX fan.
Man, the upgrade for technical sales. But no, Keith, you summarized it super well. Clear, concise, have an ask, fill them out. If you decide to, my standing answer is don't waste my time. You probably already lost any customer that is worth their salt's not going to do it to you. And you already lost at that point. But if you have to, there is value to them in enablement and training for new folks, as well as, with competitive intel or field intel. So that's all I got, Keith.
John, it's been great talking to you. But now, again, this is the sad part of our show. This is where we say goodbye. You don't have to say goodbye to us, though. Make sure you like, subscribe, all that stuff that you do on social media that the kids are doing. But if you're watching us on the YouTubes, make sure you like and subscribe. If you listen to us just audio, make sure that you've subscribed. Leave a comment, leave us a review, all the things that you do for podcasts. If you're looking to find out more about Alter the Demo Gods, or find out anything about Alter the Demo Gods, you can go to demogodspod.com. If you have questions for us or think you'd be a good guest on a future episode, you can email us at demogodspod@gmail.com. Get us wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, all that good stuff. Plus, we're on YouTube. Follow us on X. Follow us on LinkedIn. that's it for this week. Next week, we're talking about negotiation. So that should be a fun one. That'll be a bit more uplifting than RFI. Negotiation's always fun, right? Release the hostages. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next week on Alter the Demo Gods.